Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here today. It is an absolute honor to welcome today's Masterclass teacher, Katherine Woodward Thomas. Katherine is a licensed therapist and the New York Times bestselling author of Conscious Uncoupling and Calling in the One. She's a true pioneer in the field of conscious relationships, known for her powerful and compassionate guidance that helps people heal old patterns and create deeper, more authentic love. Katherine's work has touched millions of lives and helped so many of us reimagine what's possible in love, starting from within. I am so grateful she's here to share her wisdom with us today. Please join me in welcoming Katherine Woodward Thomas.
Great, thank you. Really give you some concrete tools to up-level all of your relationships across the board. So today's conversation is conscious loving from the true you. And a little bit later in the call, I'm going to be sharing about a course that I created called The Art of Creating Conscious Relationships. It's 15 hours of coaching and teaching that you get to participate in. And but I'm going to tell you more about that later in the call. But today I'm going to teach you some of the core skills that makes it possible for you to really actualize the higher potentials of love across the board with anyone who matters with you or matters to you, matters to your heart. And as I'm going through some of these teaching points, I want to invite you to take notes. You might want to get a notebook and pen out. But actually, you might have questions too. And so Melissa and my team, Susan and Marilyn, are here. They're all harvesting the questions that you put into chat, which I won't be answering during my talk, but I will come back to at the end of the call. So we've left time for you to get your questions answered. So I just want to invite us all to just take a deep breath and to get centered and present, because we're here to talk about something that is precious to each of us, which is our relationship with each other, our relationship to people that we love, that matter to us, and to have the highest and the best between ourselves and others, which also means showing up from the highest and the best of who we are in our relationships. And we're in particular going to be really talking about how we respond to hurt feelings, to disappointments, to the natural setbacks, turning points, pivotal moments in a connection in a way that's constructive and actually deepens love, rather than getting triggered into reactivity and showing up from the hurt parts of our past, from our more wounded selves in a way that tears relationship down. And we're going to be touching on how you can evolve from the patterns that you see showing up, which you do not want anymore in your life. That means maybe patterns of aloneness, or patterns where relationships get unhealthy or unfulfilling, where you kind of feel like there's a glass ceiling on the potential of that connection and you don't know what to do, but you're kind of stuck there. And so really how to evolve and get unstuck when you get stuck in relationship, and when you see your old attachment patterns from the early attachment traumas that you experienced when you were young showing up yet again. We're also going to just touch on how we can get our dependency needs met for love, our very healthy dependency needs. Sometimes we collapse neediness with our very healthy dependency needs. So I am very careful to distinguish between the two. So those healthy needs, like the need to feel safe with someone, the need to feel seen, the need to feel heard, the need for respect, the need to know that someone's telling you the truth, the need to feel like somebody actually cares about your feelings and about your needs. They might not be able to meet all of them. They might not be able to, tend to every feeling you have, but they care. So these are healthy dependency needs. We're going to also just talk about how you can break free from just looping dynamics that show up over again. So these are big promises for a 1 hour call. But let's see how far we can get, okay? Because I have a lot to share with you. And I want to start by giving us some context for the conversation today that's going to help us maybe understand our struggles to love one another, to love ourselves, to not self-abandon, to not do that again, or whatever it is that we've been struggling with. And then I'm going to share 3 practices that I think are going to make a really big difference for you on how to stay centered in the strongest, wisest parts of yourself, how to navigate those tender transitions when things get a little testy or a little heated between yourself or another, or you feel a little threatened or a little scared that maybe the relationship is going to go away or take a turn for the worst. These are what I call the pivot points of relationship, where the connection actually could easily devolve into a place of defendedness, a place of mistrust, into a contraction away from love, or it could evolve into a deepening of understanding, a deepening of affinity, a deepening of a feeling of friendship between yourself and others. So if we are easily collapsing into a younger wounded self and we don't have a handle on that, that's the part of us that suffered early attachment wounding. That's the part of us that kind of drops quickly down into the shame of I'm not good enough, I'm not wanted, I'm not safe, I'm all alone. See, no one's showing up for me. It's the lens through which we're then perceiving experience and then reacting from that place as though that lens were actually true, as opposed to old trauma. So if we react from there, when we get disappointed and we get hurt, we will inevitably show up in ways outside of conscious awareness, in ways that literally pull on others to reenact that story. And it's very painful because it is kind of a ripping the scab off an old wound. And this is what we call a rewounding experience, which is sometimes when we get into, being overly identified with that small self and we're acting from that small self, we trigger the other person into that small self. That's when we start rewounding each other. And we all know how toxic that can get, how unhealthy that can get. So, a lot of us have done a lot of work to name our attachment styles, and we know that we're kind of love avoidant or anxious attachment. But what we're actually talking about when we're giving that label of an attachment style is what's the name of the small self that you drop down into when you get disappointed or when your dependency needs are not being met with someone that you feel dependent upon, right? What happens? Where do we go internally? All of us are pretty functional, smart, together people. We do amazing things in life. We rear children and we make money and we build careers and we contribute to our communities, all sorts of great things. So it's not like we're in that space all the time. Most of us are pretty count-onable people. We're good people. We show up. But in that moment, when our dependency needs are not met, or when we feel threatened or attacked, that's when we start behaving in ways out of the old woundedness and do harm to our relationship. So we want to be able to intercept and intervene those moments. We don't want to start acting from a defensive place. We don't want to start doing push-pull dynamics, destabilizing a connection. We don't want to close our hearts and leave the relationship emotionally in a way that covertly signals another person that we're not really interested in them anymore. We don't want to start overgiving to prove our value, because guess what? It just demonstrates that our time isn't valuable, that what we have to offer isn't very valuable, certainly not as valuable as other people's time. So in other words, this is how we become actually the source of ongoing evidence for the pattern. A lot of us have been looking at our childhoods and healing our childhoods, connecting the dots, what happened when, who it happened with, where it happened, why it's showing up this way, because we've kind of gotten to the point where we understand why we are the way we are. What we haven't yet seen clearly is how we are showing up or not showing up from that old consciousness that is the source of the recurring patterns. So it's not what happened 30 years ago, it's how we showed up 30 minutes ago. We are the source of our patterns, which is really good news. It's not some nebulous unconscious. This is very good news because it tells us that we have the power right here, right now, to begin to evolve beyond that story. So we don't want to take action from the small self when you collapse into that self, because it will duplicate the patterns of the past. It happens seamlessly. Sometimes we don't even know it's happened. We just start reacting. And we have to remember that all relationships are a spectrum of possibilities, right? It's not just about meeting the right person. It's about being the right person when you meet the right person. That's the focus of our work. So you want to start to really cultivate your capacity to stay centered in the truth of your wisdom, your value, your worthiness in those moments. So even if someone is devaluing you, you can stay centered in your value. Even if someone is doing a character assassination and shaming you, you can actually stand in the truth of your goodness and not take that projection onto you into your body. Right? That's what it looks like to actually consciously love someone from the true you. It is a sovereign self that you have the capacity to hold. You have access to it. It's not that you're going to never collapse into the old story. That happens in a breath. But you have the tools to rebalance yourself and connect with the truth of who you are. Okay, so that you're not other defined. You're not vulnerable to being other defined. So these are new emergent capacities, by the way. If you don't know how to do this yet, it's not because you're bad and wrong or somehow not evolved. You are a very highly developed person. You know a lot of things. This is an emergent capacity. So if I can just back up and give us an overview of what's happening in the world of relationships. In her book, Marriage, a History, How Love Conquered Marriage, scholar Stephanie Coons zooms out on the evolution of love and marriage to remind us that relationships have changed more in the last 50 years than they did in the 5,000 years before this. That's a lot of change very rapidly, very quickly. And Polly Young Eisendrath, in her wonderful book, Love Between Equals, Relationship as a Spiritual Path, also confirms that relationships are a moving train. We've only recently moved from a role-based relationship into this soul-based union. And with that change comes a whole new set of responsibilities and requirements. And that change is the hunger in our hearts for a soulful connection is what's driving our own evolution now. Who would we need to be able to hold equal power in a relationship? That's a very different experience in modern day relationships than, say, 50 years ago, when one person gave up their career and focused solely on serving the other person to actualize their potential, right? So in order to have these kinds of connections where there's just the capacity for truth-telling, there's authentic union, deep togetherness, but not at the expense of individuality, where there's togetherness inside of one person, martyring themselves, sacrificing themselves in a way that is really would be considered unhealthy today. I mean, I'm all for sacrifice in relationship. Our children take our sacrifice, loved ones when they're sick take our sacrifice. We're talking about that kind of codependent, self-abandoning sacrifice that I think if we looked back, a few decades, we would find that that was the norm, that was the expectation. So the hunger that we have for more is what's pushing on us to grow. And the role models that we had from past generations don't really give us instructions on exactly how to grow and how to create this new form of relationship where there's two of us in the room and where we both get to have dreams, we both get to have actualize our lives, and we're doing that together, with and for each other. So I think that the goal of relationships at this point is to get to such a place of health and well-being and skillfulness that we can really support each other to actualize our potentials fully. And that there's a spaciousness in the dynamic. There's a certain freedom in the dynamic to do that. And in order to do that, we're going to need to navigate those pivot points really well. Because those are the moments that make or break a connection. And I think that we all know the woundedness or the agony of losing a relationship because one or both of us got too triggered and just started reenacting our old story. When somebody does that with us, we're kind of powerless to have the story go any other way. We might fight for that person, but if somebody is in what I call the trauma trance, the trance of that younger self, that woundedness that happened through not being loved in the way that you needed to be loved way back when. Maybe it was in the womb or in the crib, or maybe it happened when you were 2 or when you were 4. Could have happened to you when you were 12. And usually it happens really young and then it gets reenacted and solidified during our formative years in some way. So we all know the agony of losing a relationship because that trance took over. And the higher potentials of that connection were not realized. A lot of times that's what breakup grief is that so much more could have happened here. Or we know just the slow death of a relationship that just cannot get beyond it, where you process and you process and you process and you explain your wounds and you're trying to get the other person to heal that wound, but there's like too much in their wounds to actually heal your wounds. And you can stay in that dynamic for a long time because the love is there, but it becomes really unhealthy. And eventually somebody's going to have to leave, really. Or the agony of just kind of, looking back and feeling completely embarrassed, completely humiliated because you yourself showed up as a lesser version of who you are. You yourself, you gave your power away, you started people pleasing, you showed up inauthentic, all the ways that we humiliate ourselves. You showed up as needy, God forbid. That's the one thing we never want to show up as. And then they leave and you just are kind of left with the residue of the humiliation of that. Right? So this is no small matter. To learn how to navigate love from the true you, from the part of you holding wisdom, strength, development, the part of you that knows your worth, that already knows your worth, like a preconscious knowing, the part of you that has faith in the future, the part of you that has, shows up like a leader and a wise person and a competent person. That's the you we want in charge of your relationships. And because relationships go back to such a primitive place, such a home-based place, it's very easy to get hijacked into that younger self that was unhealed. And so what we want to talk about today is how to break the pattern and be able to stay true to yourself in a moment when it matters, where you can respond by speaking up for yourself or by listening more deeply, where you can respond by presencing your needs and then negotiating those needs, where you can respond by setting a boundary to pace the intimacy between you, where you can take time for yourself if you need it, where you can tolerate disappointing someone else in order to stay true to yourself. These are the things that keep love safe, keep love happy, keep love healthy over time. And for a lot of us, if you had early trauma and you do have a kind of wild, active attachment style that's, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like pretending to be a tattoo. Sometimes we identify these things, we give ourselves labels like avoidant attachment, and we wear it like it's a tattoo. It's not a tattoo. Nor is being a small self. Codependence is not a tattoo. Invisibility is not a tattoo. Being so alone in life is not a tattoo. These are all things that you have the power to evolve beyond. It's right here. You just haven't known how to do it. So that's what I really want to talk to you about today. Because the true you is, fortunately, a you that in many ways you already know. I remember I learned this once when I was actually pretty young. I had a friend, actually, when I was in my 20s, I was an aspiring actor. And I had a group of friends who were all waiters at the same restaurant. And we had actually a lot of fun together. That was a really super fun gig because they were all great people and they were all like, young people up to things that, and they needed to pay the rent. So we're all here waiting tables together. And we would hang out afterwards at the restaurant. And I'd had a particularly bad audition that day. And I was really down about it. And I didn't have any of this consciousness. So I'm completely collapsed into the younger self, which was, I have no value. I have nothing to give. I'll never amount to anything. I used to actually have my stepfather, who is an alcoholic, would, the only time he'd really talk to me was like late at night when he was drinking beer after beer after beer. And he used to just sit there and tell me, you're never going to amount to anything, you should just accept that about yourself. And I was so hungry for parental attention. I would sit there and I would listen to him, I mean, he wasn't an all bad person. He was just an unwell person. And he had a lot of qualities I liked and I loved. And I don't know if I really believed what he was saying, but it lodged in me. So it became a place that I would collapse into, in the face of a disappointment. So I had a disappointment. I showed up, I did a bad job. They were very dismissive. And I went right into, I'm never going to amount to anything. I don't have any value to give to anybody. And so I'm just kind of, we're sitting around afterwards and we're drinking wine and I just start like doing I'm never going to amount to anything. And I don't know why I'm even bothering. My friend Billy leans across the table. He takes my hand. He says, Katherine, I'm so glad that you're facing this right now. And I was so startled by what he said. I said, how dare you say that to me? He said, thank you. Very clever. Very clever, because what he did is he shifted me into the part of myself that was already present, that knew that that was just a trauma and not the truth. Right? So we must distinguish between trauma and truth. Because if we show up from trauma, we will not realize heaven in our relationships. We will duplicate hell in our relationships. Okay. So what we're looking at today is kind of getting you unstuck from the part of you that just reacts to a disappointment, an obstacle, a setback in a way that has us just collapse into that old story and to intervene on our own behalf. So right now, I actually want to give you some things that you can do. And I want to teach you 3 very simple techniques to do when you are triggered in order to find your way, back to center, to rebalance yourself. And I'm going to tell you what they are, and then we're going to take you through an exercise to just get a little taste, and these are practices, by the way, that people do, really deep and really get into the weeds with it. And they're, because they're very powerful. but I can give you a taste right now in the time that we have here. So the first one is what I'm going to call self-containment. And that's where you don't act when you feel yourself in that triggered place. You don't go into reaction, which is an action. My partner now, Michael, calls me Action Jackson because I tend to react or I be in action very quickly. I process quickly. I'm in action quickly. So learning to press the pause button and instead begin to witness yourself with love and just hold and contain whatever feelings are present. That's where you have to start. You have to start where you are. And what you want to start to do is then speak to yourself in the third person. So I'm going to say either, sweetheart, when I'm talking to myself, or I'm going to say, Katherine, honey, right? Because studies show that when you are able to speak to yourself in the third person, that we become much more regulated immediately. And also, we're able to differentiate these two parts of the self, right? You have a wise self that's witnessing your experience, the part of you that can just hold and contain with love whatever's going on for you. And you have the small self that's in your body. And there's two of you here. So the inner wise one is the one that you are identified with when you ask the question, sweetheart, what are you feeling? And then you listen to the answer from your own body. Because, the small self is not some ethereal out there self. It's actually in your body. It lives like an energy. I don't know if any of you remember that Peanuts cartoon with the character Pigpen. And if you remember Pigpen, he used to walk around in like this cloud of dust, this messy Pigpen, wherever he was. That's kind of all of us. The small self has like this invisible energetic field. It's kind of repelling. It's very unattractive. It is where neediness resides, is when you're in a small self and you're projecting onto the other person. Nobody cares about my feelings. Nobody loves me. Everybody's going to leave me, right? No one values me was mine at that dinner, at that table at the restaurant. So you actually want to get connected to the two of you that are in your own body. You want to stay identified with your adult self. And you do that simply by just remembering to ask yourself this question, sweetheart, what are you feeling? You listen for the answer. You ask yourself for one feeling at a time, and you lovingly mirror it back. I can see that you're feeling. And you mirror back the feeling. You don't change it. You don't try to fix it. You certainly don't analyze it. You stay with yourself and you just hold and contain that younger you that just got triggered, that just got your feelings hurt. Then we're going to move into the part of the practice where you have self-awareness. And by self-awareness is what's the conversation that just took you over? Because all small selves are a conversation. I'm alone. Everyone's going to leave me. I'm not wanted. Everyone's going to reject me. I'm too much. Everyone's going to, reject me or get overwhelmed by me. Other people get overwhelmed by me. That's the I'm too much. So all beliefs have a component that's about ourselves, and then they're relational. Beliefs are relational. So we want to identify, what am I assuming about myself? And what am I assuming about my relationship with others, about how others are going to feel towards me or how others are going to treat me? So we want to be able to say, to really name that, because that center is actually the heart of codependency. If everyone's going to leave me, I'm alone, everyone's going to leave, is the consciousness I just dropped down into. I'm not going to engage that conflict directly because I'll see conflict as the beginning of the end. That's what conflict avoidance is, right? So I'll start to behave in a way that creates toxicity, in other words, in the connection. The key question is, how old is this part of me? How old am I here? And it's not exact. This is not, this is a subjective experience. How old does it feel? For some of you, it might feel like I'm in the womb. I'm like, I breathed this in when I was in the womb, this shame-based sense of self. But it might have been an incident or a series of incidents, acute trauma, developmental trauma. But a sense of self was formed in response to something that was happening in the relationship. And it became your story. So again, you don't want to take action from this center. Before you go into the third part of the practice, self-mentoring. Self-mentoring. Because remember, we started with the adult you there, the wise you that can hold the larger picture, that can see things from a larger perspective, that can understand the complexities with a certain level of sophistication because you're a grown-up now. If you're thinking from the younger self, you can't think with complexity. That story is very certain and it holds very little complexity. It's always about you. It's kind of egocentric. It doesn't hold the dimensions of what else might be true. It doesn't look at things from multiple perspectives, but luckily you're a grown-up and you can look at things from multiple perspectives. So this is where you learn to be your own best friend. You really befriend yourself. And maybe you take on an archetype of, loving fairy godmother to that younger you, or, a loving grandfather to that younger part of you. And you begin to soothe yourself. And the first place you go in this part of the practice is you speak directly to the story that younger you is inside of. So if you're in an alone story, when you're in that part of you is 4, you imagine putting that little 4-year-old on your lap and looking into that little 4-year-old's eyes and say, sweetheart, you're not alone. I'm right here with you. I've got you. I love you. Okay. And when you start to work that out, you'll start to feel that younger you can actually speak to you. Sometimes that younger you is angry because you've been ignoring that part of yourself for so long. And then you say, you're right, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to correct my ways, right? You can be in a loving dialogue. And that's where, from that dialogue, you come up with a statement of truth that actually deconstructs the old story. So for the I'm alone, it might be something like, I wasn't born to be alone. I came here for love, and I have the power to learn the skills of loving relationship. Or if you had an I'm not safe story that's really activated, you just say to that younger you, you're safe with me right now. I've got you. And I have the power to learn how to keep myself and others safe in relationship. I have that power. So you're actually coming up with what we call a power statement. It sounds a little like an affirmation, but it's directly related to the small self, that false love identity that we're talking about. Okay, so let's actually give you an experience of this. So for those of you who are comfortable doing so, I invite you to close your eyes and take a deep breath as though you could breathe all the way down into your hips. And just connecting with the part of you that is wise and developed, that knows you have the capacity to learn new things, that is committed to learning these new things. The part of you that is capable and showing up with strength, resilience, and resourcefulness in other areas of your life. And just sending, just anchoring this sense of yourself, this strong, wise, vibrant, creative sense of self down through your body, like you could breathe it all the way down into your feet. And even extending the energy down into the earth, out to the edges of the room. Okay, so you have your big self here now, your higher self, your wise self, your more mature adult self with all of the resources, all of the capacities. And now I want you to consider a recent disappointment that you suffered. One that really kind of knocked you for a loop, that took your breath away, that just hurt your heart. Someone really let you down or behaved in a way that was insulting or offensive and definitely hurtful. See if you can just choose one moment in time. And notice that when you think of that, that you feel something in your body, that there are feelings associated with that insult, that disappointment, that threat. And in this moment, just send support and kindness to that self who's having that experience in your body. Don't collapse into identifying with it. See if you can stay identified with the true you. And sending love to that part of you, see if you can actually now just be with yourself without needing to change anything. And just ask yourself, sweetheart, what are you feeling? Name one feeling and just mirror it back one at a time. You might have a lot of feelings, so we'll do it a few times. So just, sweetheart, what are you feeling? And listen for the answer. When you get the answer, just say, I can see that you're feeling. Just sending kindness and love. And then asking yourself, and what else are you feeling, sweetheart? Holding and containing, not fixing a thing, not analyzing a thing, just supporting yourself by sending love to yourself and mirror it back. I can see that you're feeling. And asking again, sweetheart, what are you feeling? If you're uncomfortable with the word sweetheart, just use your name. Mirror it back. I can see that you're feeling. And one more time, what else are you feeling? Mirroring it back. I can see that you're feeling. And now asking, sweetheart, what are you making this mean about you? What's the I am or I am not? I'm not enough. I'm not wanted. I'm invisible. What wound came up and how might you give that story a name as an I am? I don't matter. I'm helpless and powerless. See if you can actually name it. You might have a few. Go to the one that starts to make you cry, the deepest one. And what's the corresponding belief about others? And from that center, what are you assuming is true about your relationship with others? Others know more than me. Others are better than me. Others are burdened by my needs. See if you can name it. The most difficult one for you to name, the one that hurts your heart the most. And then the most important question in this process here is, how old are you? How old are you? Again, it doesn't have to be true. How old are you? And again, staying centered in your wise self, just extending love to that younger you. Imagine you can look in your own eyes and first just say to yourself, sweetheart, you are not wanted. I want you. Or sweetheart, you are not unsafe. I'm right here. I've got you. You're safe with me. What's the story that younger you is stuck in, and how can you now correct that in your relationship with you? Speak directly to that younger you. And see if you can now start to share words of wisdom and truth with that younger you who's just stuck in a very limited perspective of what reality is. See if you can begin to wake yourself up with a statement of truth that wakes you up from that trance. It begins to think more holistically. This is just an opportunity to grow, and I am capable of growing and learning new things. I have the power to keep love safe. I am worthy of all that I desire to create. I am more than enough to be loved for just right now, to be loved for who I am. I need do nothing to prove my value to anyone. It's inherent to who I am. This is a power statement where you're going to start to stand for the truth of who you are. And it might take some time to really craft a power statement that you can memorize. And every time you start to go into that story, you can rebalance, you can assert that power statement. You can put the adult in charge of how you're going to respond to a breakdown, as opposed to just a flailing child who's being rewounded again. So when you're ready, you can open your eyes, take some notes, share in the chat. I just gave you a very quick introduction to the teachings that are available in the Art of Creating Conscious Relationships course that is on demand. In that course, it's a 15-hour course, and where I guide you step by step. I show you how to identify your projections onto others, identify the old story you've been vulnerable to collapsing into and enmeshing with in a moment of disappointment or insecurity. And I teach you how to navigate your love life from the sovereign self, from the true you, from the place of strength and wisdom within you. In that first module, there's actually 3 modules. Waking up from the trance is module 1, rewriting your story about yourself and others. And this is where we're going to really look at all the unhealthy patterns that have been showing up in your life: codependence, co-narcissism, idealizing others, devaluing others, feeling so alone, separating yourself, feeling like you don't belong, all of those things where you're kind of projecting a story from that small self onto other people and bringing your past trauma into the present. You're going to wake up from that trance. You're going to see it clearly. You're going to disidentify it, and you're going to be able to begin to really wake up to the truth of who you are and start showing up from that center. That's just module 1. Module 2 is called Centering in Your Sovereign Self, Relating with Integrity and Truth. This is when we actually look at something that is very unexamined, I think, for the most part, in the work that we've been doing on ourselves, which has to do with what happens when others are projecting their story onto us. And I'm going to teach you how to hold your own in those moments where you can actually become immune to the projections and accusations that others are like hurling at you from their unhealed past. You're going to learn how to generate relationships from dignity, from truth, to show up as the leader in the dynamic when that happens and someone else is just kind of captivated by their story, so that you don't get caught in the cobwebs of their narrative, their toxic narrative about themselves and their projections onto you that would, normally pull on you to duplicate their wounding. So you become immune to that. In module 3, relating clean and clear, creating wholesome, happy, loving connections. This is where I give you the blueprint for how to create relationships that can deepen and flourish over time. And the recognition that relationships are a moving train, and there are skills that we just have not known before because we haven't had the hunger that we have now to have true connections, to have long-lasting love where we're not just compromising or settling for less all the time. And I mean compromising in the toxic sense of the words. I mean, we all compromise somewhat for each other. But there's a healthy way to do that, and there's a very unhealthy way to do that. And I think some of you know what I'm talking about. So, it's not just about knowing your issues, it's actually about beginning to disappear them. That's what happens because beliefs are relational. And when you start showing up from the truth of who you are, you start having accurate projections onto others rather than seeing through the lens of your history. You actually get to evolve your relationships to a place of health and healing, which then disappears a lot of those beliefs. They just stop being an issue for you, where codependence is just no longer in your space, right? Because you know that you're not alone. You know you're connected to all of life, like a preconscious knowing, and you're immune to the pitfalls that you used to fall into. And then what happens is you start to get mirroring for what's really true about you. And beliefs, because they're relational, they were formed in relationship with somebody. Something was happening. You didn't just pluck that belief that you're alone out of the ethers. You were either being neglected or someone left, someone did leave, like something actually was happening that gave you that impression on an identity level. And then you've been getting evidence for that because you've been covertly showing up inside that story that pulls on others to duplicate that wound. And guess what? It's also transformed in relationship with others, where instead of doing what you did when you thought you were invisible, which is being self-sufficient to the extremes so nobody could find their way into your world, or being conflict avoidant and you were afraid to bring up issues that needed to be engaged between you because you thought it might be the beginning of the end, like all those, ways that kind of could lead nowhere else to creating, self-abandonment and abandonment from others, leaving you, yes, alone again. Right from this true center, you can take the risk to start to show up with much more transparency and authenticity and vulnerability that lets others find their way into your world. You adjust your healthy expectations that intimate relationship really is about forming a connection with somebody who wants to meet your needs, is capable of meeting your needs, can see the truth of who you are, can stand with you, for you, lift you up, help you to transform, help you to actualize. So you're not feeling alone anymore. You can engage conflict directly in a healthy way, because that's what I teach you in this module. And you can show up in a way that really roots down love, because guess what? That's where love is rooted down, is when there are differences that get engaged in a really conscious way. That's where you learn about each other. That's where you grow your capacity to love each other. So then you can actually graduate from being identified with that small self. You're the one in charge all the time. You have that part of you with you, but that's a beloved inside of you. You're no longer at war with that part of you because it's not in charge of your life anymore, not running the show. So the good news about this course, it's usually $297, but for you guys, for our friends in the Wisdom of Life audience, we're doing $100 off. So it's $197. And I think you now have questions that you're going to be able to ask me. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's how you can register for that course. I have to say it's one of my favorite courses ever that I created, because it kind of just goes right to the heart of what all of us are up to in our evolution right now. And I think we're all playing a wonderful game of how to love each other better, how to love our lives, and how to not keep staying stuck. If you're stuck in unhealthy dynamics, it means you're not free to really fly in life. You're kind of trying to fly with cement around your ankles. We actually need, good, healthy relationships to be able to fly fully. And that's my prayer for you, is that you have that. You find your way to that. Thank you.
So, hi, everyone. I'm a member of Katherine's team. My name is Susan. It's a pleasure to see you all. So the first question that came in, which is really great, is how do you skillfully work with someone who's caught in the trauma trance?
Oh, great. That sounds like you're a therapist or a healer of some sort. Or you're talking about like a beloved. There's two ways
Mm.
to answer that question because we do train therapists and coaches in our work. I'm going to talk to you as though you're talking about a beloved. First of all, it doesn't really work to say, oh, you're just in a trauma trance right now. It's so insulting to someone. So you just, I wish we could. And I think if you're really both doing the work rigorously together, you could give each other permission. But here's the thing, the pain that's up for them in that moment is real. And we have to be tender with each other. If you have a beloved and they're kind of in reaction to something you just did because it re triggered that old hurt, you just want to be with them. You don't want to start explaining yourself. You don't want to start, saying that's not what I meant, or being defensive, or you're just in a trauma trance. What you want to do is actually mirror the feeling. This is what therapists do so well. That's why we don't get triggered so much by our therapists, because they're really good at mirroring our feelings. So, this is a good tip to take from therapists. Not like we're each other's therapist, but it is healing and it does de-escalate the situation. So you could say something like, wow, that really upset you, what I just said, right? What nerve did I just hit in you? I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Thank you for telling me. Right. So you just kind of de-escalate and you be kind in that moment, because that gives somebody the spaciousness to start to examine themselves. Right. And it's not going to escalate. What happens where we get in trouble, it's not like we're never going to fall into the trance of that story. We're actually all vulnerable to that. So it's learning how to not get into reaction. So in that moment, you become the leader of the conversation. Usually what happens when somebody goes into reaction and kind of, comes at us with their old trauma trance is then we get reactive, which means that their younger self is in charge of what's happening between us. So when we're looking at that module too, like how to actually be kind of immune to those reactions, it's not like we're, disengaged, we don't really care about the person. It's that we really love that person enough to know that we're all vulnerable here, that we've all really been through a lot. And some of us have really suffered very severe hurts in our past, that we're still vulnerable to dropping into that story and beginning to see through that lens. And I don't think that we need to tap dance around that wound, but we do need to be kind. We don't need to be afraid of that, but we do need to be gentle and non-reactive so that things don't escalate from there. And your job in that moment is to keep yourself in your adult center and not get triggered into your own trauma, because usually, traumatized self is contagious to traumatized self. Okay, so you have the skills to intercept that and intervene.
So some people asked if there's a time limit as far as access to the course. So just so that once you purchase, you do have lifetime access. So you can do it at your own pace. There's no rush to go through. You can do it whenever it feels right for you. Katherine, some people are wondering if this course in your work is mainly applied to romantic relationships, or if they can apply it to familial relationships as well, such as a broken mother bond.
Yeah, beautiful questions. Thank you. I love this course because it's about all of our relationships across the board. It is not just about romantic love. But it is about our relationships with people who matter. So your relationship with your family members, for example, many of which you might not be on a consciousness path and, might not be very interested in having growth-oriented conversations with you and how to navigate those conversations with people. Could also be if you're in a work situation with someone who's difficult. A lot of times, we have to make peace with people who are unhealthy in our relationships. And part of the impetus for this course was really an inquiry in how do we stay anchored in our best selves and generative of, maturity and wisdom in our relationships when we're in connection with unhealthy people, our boss, our, housemate, our roommate. So it is across the board, and it will up-level all of your relationships, which I'm really excited about this course for.
Great. And we have someone wondering, how can you express difficult feelings regarding things like finances truthfully when one doesn't like confrontation?
When one doesn't, meaning yourself or the other person. So
I'm not sure which way they were wondering. Maybe both.
Yeah. So read the first part of the question again.
How can one express difficult feelings truthfully when one doesn't like confrontation?
Okay, so this is not my work. This goes to the Gottmans, right? God bless the Gottmans. So we start with the future that we desire, right? That's always a great place to start. So you might say something like, sweetheart, this is a tender conversation for us to have, but I'm so committed to us being really prosperous. And I'm so committed to us being, really together in our finances that I do want to have a conversation about that. When would be a good time? My commitment is to really, really overcome, the rough spots between us and have this start to go well between us. So you're starting with the future. You're kind of giving them a heads up. And when you get into the heart of it, you can complain. What you can't do, I mean, you can do whatever you're going to do, but if you want it to go well, you're committed to it going well. What you don't want to do is do a character assassination. Well, you're bad with money. You don't want to, disparage somebody's character, or you don't want to project onto them and assert that they have, motives. You just act out your old wounds with money. What you do is you sponsor the best of them. You assume the best of them. And you set up structures for it. Some people are going to need, can we just talk about this for, let's block off 1 hour to have this conversation, when we're both relaxed and not at work and we can really focus together. So you recognize that these are tender conversations and adult conversations. So we try and steer clear out of triggering each other in the conversation. If you do get triggered in the conversation, you take a time out. You just take a time out and recenter. You give spaciousness to the conversation. I hope that's helpful. Anything?
Great. There's some people wondering if any discounts are offered. So I'm not too sure about that for seniors, for example. So I'd encourage you to reach out to the customer support at Wisdom for Life. And Melissa can drop the email in the chat so that you can ask them any questions that you have about this offering. And I think we're almost out of time, Katherine. Would you like one more question, or what do you think?
Well, I want to honor people's time, so I think we are going to end here. If you have more questions, I think you can just write into Wisdom for Life. They're hosting this call, and they'll forward anything to me if you want to communicate anything to me. But I do want to really thank you for being in the conversation and really taking this material to heart. I can feel, I'm reading in the chat, and I can really feel you with me in the conversation. And I just appreciate your good efforts. And I just want to just say goodbye with a deep, deep blessing to all of you here. And I want to thank Susan and Marilyn from my team who was here, and also Melissa for hosting today. And thank you to Wisdom for Life for having us. And bye for now, everyone. Bye. Lots of love, everyone.